Assalamu alaikum. In the most holy name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness there is no God but Allah, who came in the person of Master Farrakhan Muhammad, to whom all praise is forever due. We thank Allah over and over again for raising in our midst His messenger, Messiah, the exalted Christ, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. And we thank them both for their mercy in our midst, the national representative of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. In those names, I greet all of you in the words of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Beloved, today is September the 17th, 2019. 34 years ago today, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan had an experience unlike any other human being as we approach the very end of this world and the coming of a brand new world. 96 months after he determined that he would stand up and rebuild the Nation of Islam, and 55 months after he declared to the entire world, he was taken up in a small mountain village in Mexico into the mother wheel. Now, beloved, we are engaged in the course Self-Improvement, the Basis for Community Development. It is critical as we begin to undergo the exodus that was prophesied in the book of Genesis when God, Allah, made the promise to Abraham that we be spiritually, mentally, and morally prepared for the great separation from the children of our slave masters, but the greater separation from the mindset of Satan. And therefore, the experience that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan had 34 years ago is more than relevant to us today. It is critical to our salvation. Why? Because on that wheel, and Minister Farrakhan has spoken of this on many occasions, he received directly from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, number one, a particular message for the world, but secondly, and possibly more importantly, he was given divine guidance that ultimately became the root of what we know as self-improvement, the basis for community development. This set of guides from 1 to 21 thus far is a peek into the mind of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. But it is not just the story of one man's journey from man to God. It lays out the precise path by which you and I can fulfill scripture, where we are called God's children of the Most High God. Now, the minister had already begun, as I noted earlier, the rebuilding of the Nation of Islam, which fell and essentially disintegrated after the departure of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in 1975. He built the Nation of Islam from the ground up, and all he had was the guidance of his teacher. Now, this experience that he had on the wheel, I want to share with you. It is in the foreword to the study guides that we are on now, the official set of study guides of self-improvement, the basis for community development. And I just wish to read to you briefly, because it is so important that even if we're aware of this experience, we should reflect on it continually. In 1985, the minister was the target of an unprecedented propaganda campaign of vicious libel and slander. It was a saturation bombing by Jewish leadership through nearly every media outlet in the United States. It was a level of assault exclusively aimed at the one anointed to sit in the seat of the leader of the Nation of Islam. Everything Minister Farrakhan said, everything he did was surrounded by controversy. On the night of September 17th, 1985, he was carried up on a mountain in Mexico in a vision-like experience. As he and those with him reached the top of the mountain, a wheel, known to most as UFO or unidentified flying object, but those of us who know and follow the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad know that this is the great mother wheel referenced in the book of Ezekiel. That wheel appeared at the side of the mountain. A voice from the wheel came to him and called him to leave the group that he was with and to come alone. He was told to relax. A beam of light came from the wheel, and he was carried up on that beam of light into it. There was a pilot on the smaller wheel that the minister was brought into. The minister could not see the pilot, but he could feel his presence. As the small wheel lifted off at a terrific speed, the minister knew he was being transported to the great mother wheel or mother plane, a human-built planet. I want you to think on that momentarily. A human-built planet. Now, knowing that the minister was fearful of seeing this great mechanical object in the sky, this is an object that is a half mile by half mile in dimension. The pilot maneuvered the craft to prevent the minister from seeing it, so he backed into it and he docked in a tunnel. And the minister was escorted into a room where he heard the clear sound of the voice of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad addressing him through a speaker. Now, remember, this is 1985. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad had departed in 1975. In addition to the verbal directives that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave him during this overwhelming experience, something else occurred. Now, here are the minister's exact words about it. Quote, "As the Honorable Elijah Muhammad spoke, a scroll full of cursive writing rolled down in front of my eyes, but it was a projection of what was being written in my mind. As I attempted to read the cursive writing in English, the scroll disappeared and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad began to speak to me again." And I want to say to you at this point, beloved, that you can get the complete detail of this experience by going to the time and what must be done. You go and visit, that's part 51 of the Time and What Must Be Done series by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Go to noi.org/the time. But what I want to remind us of is this, because we don't worship a spook God. The most profound statement we are taught that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad ever made is this: God is a man. I want to get across to us and remind us that this vision-like experience occurred while the minister was deeply immersed in working the mission of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, 100% committed, under tremendous assault in this propaganda campaign and his life being threatened. Now, in the midst of all of these attacks, Minister Farrakhan determined to go and speak in Los Angeles, California, where he addressed 19,000 Black people. This was the largest gathering ever to hear the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad anywhere west of the Mississippi River. That was September the 14th, 1985. Now, on October 7th, the 88th birth anniversary of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, despite intense pressure, a huge gathering of 50,000 Black people, which only 25,000 could come into the facility, came to Madison Square Garden complex to see and hear the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. At that time, he was surrounded by a female security detail. And he told the audience then, I want to send a message to the entire world that the world is in the condition it is in because the world disrespects women. The world is headed into hell because the world disrespects womanhood. Whenever a people disrespect the womb, they cut off their creative powers. I'm going to say that again. Whenever a people disrespect the womb, they cut off their creative powers. When you disrespect a woman, you disrespect that which absolutely shows you a part of the nature of God himself. So prior to the experience on the Will, 19,000 Black people in Los Angeles. After the experience on the Will, October 7th, 50,000 people in New York City. Now, 1 year later, almost to the day, September 21st, 1986, he delivered a message in Phoenix, Arizona, which provided the base for the course, self-improvement, the basis for community development, and it carried, this is where the title for the course comes from. And I'll just read briefly this excerpt from that lecture in Phoenix, which was to a diverse audience. Quote, there is a verse in the Holy Quran that says, on the day of judgment, if a man owned all the wealth in the earth, he would ransom it to keep himself from the chastisement of God. What is it about the chastisement of God that is so great? And what is it about the wealth people abundantly seek that is so little that you would give it all away to save your life in a time of trouble? That is why I have chosen the subject, self-improvement, the basis for the community development, because it is the improvement of each of us as human beings that is lacking in the world. And because instead of human beings improving, they are degenerating, then there is no hope for the nations. They are all on a path of self-destruction. 3 months later, December 1986, he dictated a letter to me, and from that day through 1991, he dictated to me 18 study guides. Then later, from 2000 to 2008, we took some of his lectures that he was delivering and produced 19, 20, and 21. Now we find ourselves, beloved, at the end of Study Guide 12, the 4 great impediments to self-improvement. And if we really reflect on the first 12 study guides were really a journey into our own mind and helped us to get in touch with what moves us, our desires, our motives. It also empowered us to find out that we are capable of resolving many of our own problems, and there's only really one being that we need, and that is the supreme being. We have been guilty, I have been guilty of what is called polytheism, which is taking gods besides Allah, worshiping multiple gods. Whenever we say to ourselves, oh my God, If she leaves me, I'll die. If he leaves me, I'll die. If I get fired, I'm not going to survive. If I get put out of this house, I'll never make it. Then we are setting up gods besides Allah. We learned in those first 12 study guides that nothing takes place except as a result of his active or permissive will. In other words, he either makes it happen or he allows it to happen. We learn we are created to face difficulty. That should not make us sad. It should make us happy because we face difficulty every single day of our lives. And if we didn't know that divine truth, we would think, what am I doing wrong? That every day of my life, no matter how smooth things are, something comes up to impede my path. So now we have gone through 12 study guides. We've spent 4 of those guides building the will. The will is the power of God within us. We have learned about the pillars of Islam. We've learned about prayer and fasting. We have also learned in those last several study guides, we are in fact a God. Study guide 10, the God within. But we've learned that we possess something called the ego. And that ego thinks it is the supreme God. And if we don't check that ego, we can find ourselves on a path into conflict with the supreme God. So it empowers us, and yet we have to balance that power with submission to the God. And then he closes out, we're about halfway through the first 21. He closes out that section that's purging us of those things which get in the way of our salvation by identifying 4 great impediments to self-improvement: racism, sexism, nationalism, and materialism. And all of these isms or practices or doctrines are really rooted in one single thought that all of us have entertained. I am better. I'm better than you. Those 3 words are actually the root of the mind of Satan. That's where it begins. If you go into the Holy Quran, you will see Iblis, Satan, in a dialogue with Allah himself. Allah gives a command that he is going to place a ruler in the earth, and we go through that in the first 12 study guides. And he tells the angels that you are to bow to this one I've chosen as the ruler. Iblis said, I will not bow. Allah said, even though I'm the one giving the commandment. And Iblis said, I am fire and he is dust. If you notice, whenever the devil comes up in us, or we encounter devil in someone else, or we suffer from the oppression of a whole race of devils, the I am better is always supported by a reason. No one just says I'm better. They say I'm better because. Well, with racism, we are saying I am better because I am white. This world is based on a doctrine of white superiority and black inferiority. With sexism, the man says, I am better because I am a man, and this is just a woman. It is an imbalance of the law that places the man in authority. But he is not better. He is not more suited. It is obedience to Allah that determines our suitability. I am better because my country has more wealth and power than yours. USA, USA. I am better materialism because my shoes cost $300. My watch costs $1,000 and you're just wearing some shoes from a discount store. My house is bigger than yours. My car is a luxury brand and you're just driving. I'm in an automobile and you're in a car. Now that we have completed those 12 study guides, and I repeat and reiterate, reading the books is only half. The other half, and arguably the more important, is coming out to the mandated meetings on Friday nights, our mosque Friday night meeting, and sitting in a circle of gods, or what Minister Farrakhan calls underdeveloped gods, with the potential to become God, and exposing our thoughts to each other. That's a healing and a benefit. And we're not there with each other for one of us to be better than the other, but it allows us a release, number one, because we live in Satan's world. And now we get to come to a place of refuge, wherever our meetings are, to be with others who think and believe like you do. And I say to you, whether you are Christian, Muslim, agnostic, it doesn't matter. If you are original, you are a spiritual person. So very quickly, because I've gone on longer than I planned, Study Guide 13 is up next. This study guide is absolutely, as the others, profound. And remember that the study guides are cumulative. And so when you leave one and go to the next one, don't leave what you learned in the previous guides behind you. Incorporate it, including the vocabulary, the glossary, into our daily lives. Study Guide 13 was given to the students and followers of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad in October 1988 as preparation for the rededication of the headquarters mosque of the Nation of Islam, Mosque Mariam, in the National Center for the Re-Education and Retraining of the Black Man and Woman. Now, Study Guide 13 begins on page 60, and you will receive our weekly assignment within the next day or so. You will see, now this is what's different about, among other things, that's different about Study Guide 13. You're going to see 2 letters from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan that may not seem as though they're appropriately placed, but they give you a peek into what was going on in the nation in 1988 and the circumstances and the battles that we were fighting even back then. One letter is dated October the 9th of 1988, and Minister Farrakhan is explaining to the believers why the mosque is not ready for being dedicated, which was the original plan, was to dedicate it in October of 1988, but it wasn't finished. He goes into the spiritual meaning underlying the physical incompleteness of the National Center. And that letter also leads us in to Study Guide 13. And actually, no, I'm going to back up, beloved. I made a mistake. This is the letter that opens up Study Guide 13, October 9th, 1988. There are 2 letters that precede that the minister distributed to the believers. And when you see those letters, you're going to learn about battles we were fighting, where New York City, where the Jewish leaders did not want the minister to speak in New York. Does that sound familiar? And our battles to obtain venues. He also talks about his then national assistant, who is now his international assistant, Brother Akbar Muhammad, and other things that we were contending with. Well, why is this relevant? Remember, this is before cell phones. This is before email, text, internet, any of that. Everything was done through what they now call snail mail. And the minister used the Friday night study group to deliver directives to the Nation of Islam. These letters were passed out physically on paper to the believers. But this letter, October 9th, 1988, is the letter introducing number 13 and why he calls it the price of redemption. I'm not going to read the letter because we want you to read that letter yourself in preparation for the upcoming study group, which will begin this on Friday night. And I'll tell you, oh my God, this is so beautiful. He explains how he prepared this study during Savior's Day. And the original one that we passed out at Savior's Day was in this luxurious folder that was, it was just the whitest of white. And when you felt it, it almost felt like fabric. And inside, it was a gift to all the believers who attended Savior's Day. And inside, they found Study Guide 13. Now, he also gave some directives to the nation. And one of the things he directed was 5 major steps. Now, remember, we're trying to get into this mosque and we are being impeded by what ostensibly is a physical slowdown, but it's really a spiritual slowdown because we're not demonstrating a readiness mentally and spiritually to go in that magnificent building. So he said in this, I will lift this, there are 5 major steps that must, all capital letters, be taken immediately by us, the believers. He names himself, us, the believers, in order to put ourselves in the position to be forgiven for our sins, that Allah may heal the wounds of the nation, so that when the house is dedicated, we will also stand in a magnificent spiritual house, restored, consecrated, dedicated for the rest of our lives. And what does he name? Prayer, fasting, the dietary law of 1 meal a day, charity and sacrifice, and lastly, work. The one last thing I want to share, this will remind us of something that will sustain us and strengthen us through what is coming in a few days. He reminded us of something that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said. The nation will never fall again. So may Allah bless us all with love and the light of understanding and the enjoyment and pleasure that comes from engaging in this study. Assalamu alaikum.